Super Beanie Man here. Welcome for joining me for this video where I take a look back at my top 10 most disappointing PS4 games from this generation. So, without further ado, let's get on with it. Number 10 is Infamous Second Son. Now, this was one of the very early PS4 games. It is one of the first sort of games where I was really kind of hyped for it because I loved Infamous 1 and 2 on the PS3, so a new Infamous game with a new hero was very exciting, but as I played it, I kind of felt like it was a bit lacking and it didn't really feel like a true next-gen open-world experience. Sure, it was really pretty and all of the particle effects with the smoke clouds and the fire and stuff like that looked cool, but it kind of felt a bit empty. The city was just not really that memorable, and to be honest, I kind of missed Cole. It was a shame that he kind of sacrificed himself at the end of the second game. And Delsin, I don't know, it just wasn't as gripping. He was just Troy Baker basically with a beanie hat on, and it's coincidentally it's the beanie I wear in a lot of my videos because I got the limited edition or whatever it was at the time that came with it. But it was a fun game, don't get me wrong, but it was just unremarkable. You could kind of tell that it was just made just to look pretty more than advancing the gaming world through its gameplay or anything like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's kind of just a bit disappointing when it's the third game in a series and it kind of takes a few steps backwards. They did make a sequel to this in the form of like a standalone expansion called First Light, which starred the girl that you're with in this game, and her neon powers were a lot more fun to use. But as it stands, Second Son was always the disappointing entry in this franchise for me. Number 9. Assassin's Creed Unity. Now, by the time the PS4 came around, the Assassin's Creed series was getting a little bit stale. There was Black Flag, and that was a cool game and all, but that was more Pirates Creed than Assassin's Creed. So when they announced Assassin's Creed Unity, and it looked like it was finally getting back to actual Assassins, I was really excited for it. But unfortunately, Ubisoft decided to throw in multiplayer, and they based the whole game pretty much around this concept, as it wasn't just you as an assassin in this world. No, there was other human players that you could team up with to do some co-op assassinations through the story missions. And while you could do it in single player, the game was at its best when you were playing with friends. But if you played it with strangers, you'd often find they would just run forward and just do whatever they wanted, and they wouldn't really play it your way and how you wanted to be stealthily, and that was the biggest problem. Well, that and all of the glitches in the game when this released, my god, this was really buggy, and Assassin's Creed was really starting to show its age, and this was one of the ones that disappointed me. Assassin's Creed 3 was a real disappointment, and then this one was also disappointing. After the slight high of Black Flag, we crashed and burned with this game. It was so glitchy, and I think I've even put a few glitch videos from this game on my channel back in the day. It just wasn't that great. It felt really rushed, and the glitches really did sour the experience when you're getting stuck on roofs or you fall through a building and then just end up getting trapped in limbo, or all the other freaky bugs this game had. It was just besieged with problems, and the main title character, he wasn't really that interesting, and he was really forgettable to us. I can't remember his name. I thought I would kind of like him, as he did have a sort of kind of Aladdin-esque charm about him, but his story was just forgettable really, and thinking back now I can't really remember that much about it. I think he had a childhood sweetheart and they were friends from a young age, and his dad was an assassin and he died by the Templar who was the girl's father or something like that. But yeah, it was the beginning of the end really for the franchise. And though Syndicate, the London-based one, came out shortly after this, and it was a better game, it still just felt really stale, and that led to them just rebooting the franchise kind of thing with Origins and Odyssey and now Valkyrie or whatever it's called. But I stopped playing after Syndicate, mainly because of this one left a sour taste in my mouth, and by that point I was bored with it, and I kind of realised that the story was just going nowhere. I was in it for the whole Desmond thing and the Apple of Eden and trying to figure out what was going on and what would happen with the Assassin's Creed set in the present day or in the future, what it kind of hinted at. But after Desmond got killed in one of the earlier games, and then these were just like, I think it was like a website or a film or something, I don't know, it was really weird. You kind of knew that it just weren't going anywhere. So yeah, this one was just disappointing for me. Number 8. Rise of the Tomb Raider. Now, I could also put in Shadow of the Tomb Raider here. Both of these sequels to the 2015 Tomb Raider reboot, don't quote me on that, were just so disappointing in my opinion. Sure, they were well-made games and they were fun to go through, but it just fell flat for me, to be honest, and it just really didn't live up to my expectations after playing that reboot. At the end of the reboot, she gets the dual pistols, and you kind of feel like, yes, she's about to become the Lara Croft that I remember from the 90s, but in these two sequels, she kind of doesn't really develop, and it just kind of gets held back. Everyone was raving about the bow and arrow from the first reboot, and I feel like they kind of felt forced to use that, so they didn't really use the dual wielding pistols. It was all about the bow again, and that just didn't really make sense. In the first game, she was shipwrecked and she was just using whatever she could find around her, yet in these ones it wasn't really the case, but she was still using the bow, and the bow was great, don't get me wrong, but it kind of felt like she never progressed as a character in these two games for me, and she was just a whiny, crazy mass murderer in these, more than what Drake is in Uncharted. At least he had a good character, but she just didn't really have the personality that I wanted to have in these two sequels, and Rise especially was just really forgettable. It, for me, was like the Quantum of Solace of James Bond movies, in that it came after a really good opening, and then it was just a forgettable sequel, to be honest. And I think my frustrations with this game also weren't helped by the fact that this was a timed Xbox exclusive, so being a PlayStation owner, I had to wait an extra year to play this game, and when I finally played it, I was just really underwhelmed. I mean, like I said, it is a well-made game, and I did enjoy moments of it, but it just didn't live up to the hype for me, and it felt like more of the same. That's the problem with these two sequels. It really just was more of the same, and it didn't really advance in any sort of way. And you could throw that argument at the original Tomb Raiders. After Tomb Raider 2, they were pretty much just all the same game. It was basically just level packs more than anything. But with these, I just expected more. I expected it to feel more like the Tomb Raider I knew from back in the day, but it just didn't, and it just didn't really go anywhere great for me. So it just left a bitter taste in my mouth, and I don't really know what they're going to do with Tomb Raider now, because Crystal Dynamics are busy with that shitty Avengers game. So who knows what will happen, and who knows what's in store for Lara, but this was definitely a disappointment for me, and I am a massive Tomb Raider fan. Number 7 is Tekken 7. Yes, I see the irony there. So, I am a massive Tekken fan ever since I played the original on the PS1, and for me, Tekken is the best beat-em-up franchise out there. I just never really got on with Street Fighter, and I just didn't see the appeal, but I really loved Tekken with its combo attacks. Learning a character's moves and all the different button combinations that I could pick up was just great, and I had so much fun playing Tekken 3 back in the day, and for me, that is the best beat-em-up game ever made, closely followed by Tekken Tag 1, 2 and Tekken 5, but I'll let you figure out the order of those. So the promise of a next-gen Tekken game got me really excited, and we had to wait a long time for this to come out, but when it did, I finally got it in my hands and began to play it. I was kind of frustrated and very disappointed with it, to be honest. it just didn't feel right for me. They had all this crap rage art stuff in there where you could press a button and do this ultimate move and it would take off a chunk of your opponent's health, and it just felt really cheap. It felt like they really changed the way Tekken played in this game, and this, for me, was one of the worst games for the whole juggling aspect, because you could just get locked in a combo getting bounced up in the air constantly, and that just really pissed me off. And sure, I adapted as Nina Williams and Law, and I learnt how to do that myself, but it just seems to go further and further away from what made Tekken so great for me. I mean, you could juggle enemies in Tekken 3, but it wasn't for such a long time, and it was really hard to kind of do it. But in this, it's just really simple, and I just didn't like it. And the story mode was also disappointing. After seeing it being really well done in like the Mortal Kombat and Injustice games, I was expecting that level of quality, but what we got was a bit shit, to be honest. I mean, there was even those weird bits where you were like Lars with a gun killing people. It was just terrible. The Tekken story going like campaign games are never really that great, but this one was hyping it up so much and it was just shit, and the story itself was just trash. And I hated the way they tied in Akuma to the history of the Tekken franchise, because he was sort of involved with Aihachi's wife or something like that, and his boss fight was just absolute bullshit taken to the extreme. And it was just a lackluster effort for me. It was just really frustrating. And all the other characters, they were just hard done by. Plus the fact that stalwarts like Lian Chaolan and Ala Williams were missing and then later added in all the season passes was just frustrating. I would have rather had Tekken 8 by now instead of all the season passes for this disappointing game. Number 6. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Now, everyone I knew at the time was really hyping this game and saying it was amazing, and I didn't buy it when it came out. I bought it a bit later on the cheap, and I have to say, it just really disappointed me, and I didn't really see what all the fuss was about. I was expecting a sort of female, sort of maybe God of War-esque game, but what I got was pretty much just a walking simulator with a slight smattering of combat. And don't get me wrong, the story itself was very interesting, and the whole delving into someone's mind and their psyche was extremely well done, and if you played it with headphones, it was fantastic. But it was the actual gameplay that just let it down for me and just made it really disappointing. You would just wander around trying to find these trigger points to advance the story, and it was just boring what you actually had to do, and some of the puzzles were just really frustrating when you had to change the realms or whatever it was, and I just really didn't like it. I would rather have just watched all the cutscenes put together as one long movie. I think it would have just worked better. The combat was pretty cool, but it was quite limited, and to be honest, it wasn't really worth full price, so I'm glad I didn't buy it straight away. I just didn't think it was that great, and unfortunately this is no longer a PlayStation game because the sequel will be exclusive to Microsoft, so I won't get to see how Ninja Theory improve on this game, because I really do love that developer and I wish Sony would have brought them, because they make some really underrated gems, to be honest. Enslaved Odyssey to the West was an excellent game, and Heavenly Sword, the PS3 God of War, female God of War hack and slash game, was excellent. I really loved that game, and that one never got a sequel either, yet this one does, and I just don't think this one was worthy. Number 5. Little Big Planet 3. For me, this third game in the Little Big Planet franchise was disappointing because it just felt really unremarkable. I guess the novelty of this series has kind of worn off with me by this point, and the new ideas such as the new sack people like the bird and the dog or whatever the fuck it was, and then the big guy, just didn't really add that much to the game for me. And as I played most of it solo, I didn't really see the appeal of having all of those characters on screen at once, and their gameplay just wasn't that great, to be honest. Maybe it was the new dev Sumo Digital taking the reins for this game, but it just didn't feel like it had the same magic as the first two. even the music just wasn't as memorable, and I don't know, it just wasn't, I didn't think it was that great, to be honest. And it's probably the reason why there wasn't a Little Big Planet 4. And now, as we go to PS5, we're getting a new straight-up platformer starring Sackboy instead. Sure, all of the creation tools were great, and there were some brilliant user-created levels that I've actually looked at throughout the years, but the actual game itself, it just wasn't the best one, to be honest. And I was kind of expecting a bit more when we went into next gen, and this one just failed to sort of really deliver that, to be honest. It just wasn't as big an advancement that I wanted. I was hoping for that sort of Dreams level of advancement with this game, but unfortunately we just never got it. Number 4. Watch Dogs. My god, there was so much hype around this game when it was coming out. It was originally shown as it's honestly a PS3 footage we're showing here at E3, where it looked absolutely fantastic. And then when it came out on both the PS3 and PS4, there was a clear visual downgrade. But for me, that wasn't the most disappointing thing about the game. Oh no, it was more the story, the character of Aiden Pierce, and the gameplay that disappointed me the most. You see, the story was just lame. You were trying to get revenge for your niece or nephew being killed, and that was just weird in itself. And Aiden Pierce wasn't a very good character or a very interesting person to begin with, so I didn't really feel for him, to be honest. Maybe if it was his kid, you'd feel a bit more, but I don't know, I just didn't like the guy, to be honest. So the story was a bit of a dud for me, and also the gameplay. It was kind of like Assassin's Creed 1, in where it had a few neat ideas, but that was all it had, and it just tried to extend that throughout its entire runtime, and it just kind of fell flat a bit for me. I had most enjoyment out of this through watching it on live with PlayStation, or whatever they called it, where I was actually watching people stream the multiplayer, because that was really cool in that people could invade your game and you had to try and find them and they had to try and take you down. And that's what I watched quite a lot, especially in the early days of live from PlayStation. I just found myself watching it more than I was actually playing it, but I still got the platinum, so at least I did see it through to the end. But it didn't leave a big enough impression on me, a good enough impression on me, for me to buy the sequel. And I think that was like it for a lot of people, and even the developers realised they kind of fucked up with this first game, because they really did change it for the second one, as it was much more, from what I saw from the trailers, having never played the game, it felt a bit more Saints Row and a bit more crazy and kooky and a bit more out there. So I never really bothered, because I didn't think this one was great. Though I do think I will get Legion, which is set in London, for PS5 for Christmas. So hopefully they kind of course corrected it by this point and got this franchise back on the top where it should have been from the beginning. But as it stands, the first Watch Dogs was just a little bit, it was just okay. It was an okay game, but it wasn't really, it didn't blow my socks off, to be honest. It was cool, and I liked the hacking stuff that you could do, but it was quite limited. You could do the same sort of things over and over on the same streets. You could raise the bollards and stuff like that. It didn't really do it as much in depth as I thought it could have been. Number 3. The Order 1886. This, like Watch Dogs, was another early PS4 title that was getting hyped to fuck, and I fell for it, and I was really excited for this game. But then as the reviews came in when it launched, we were greeted with the fact that this was pretty much more like a demo than a full-priced game, as it was just criminally short. And to be honest, it's a shame that they never made a sequel, because I did like this game. I liked the idea of it, at least. The whole werewolves thing, and the setting, and the characters, and the way they were kind of like the knights of the round table, weren't they, or something, I think. And it was cool, but there just wasn't enough of it. The gameplay just, it did the same thing all the way through. You could play it for 10 minutes and then that's it. You've kind of seen everything bar the odd new weapon that gets introduced. It just played the same, and it just felt like it was really rushed, or that they were just given a strict deadline so they couldn't make the full game that they wanted to. For me, this just feels like the opening chapters of a much bigger game, and it does tease a sequel, yet we've never got to see it at this point. And it was also disappointing with like the werewolf battles, because it was just the same sort of scripted thing over and over again, and they repeated that for like the final boss, which was just stupid. But yeah, it was a cool setting, but the game was just far too short for its own good, and other than shooting there wasn't much else to do in the environment, unless you like picking up random objects and watching as you move your hand around using the stick to look at the object. Other than that, it was just basic. You know, you could platinum this in a day. It was that short and that easy, and it's a shame because it could have been a really good game, this, and a cool franchise for Sony. Number 2. Just missing out on being the most disappointing PS4 game is No Man's Sky. So I wasn't really interested in this game. It wasn't really on my radar, so I wasn't involved and swept up in all of the hype surrounding its release, and I only ended up buying it and deciding to buy it a few days before it came out, after chatting to one of my mates who was hyping it up to me, saying it was this amazing world-changing game, and I thought it sounded pretty cool, and I hadn't had any other games to play at that point, so I took a chance and brought it, and it was really disappointing. It's just one of those grindy games where you're trying to do something but you can't do it because you haven't got the resources, so then you have to go and mine for those resources for ages and grind those out in order to be able to do the thing that you wanted to do, and that's pretty much just it over and over. The planets that you could explore as well just weren't that great. They were just, you know, user created feeling almost. You know, I wanted planets that were really different. Going to one that's just like built up with rocks and nothing there, then going to a planet full of life, so there's loads of wildlife, there's trees, there's palm beaches, it's bright and colourful blue skies, then going to another planet that's slightly more advanced and it has some futuristic tech. There's a lot of skyscrapers, cities and things like that, you know, like the planet variety there is in Ratchet and Clank or something like that, but this game really didn't have that. It was more just the same sort of recycled Lego bricks, just assembled slightly different to say it was different, and the same can be said for all the creatures you found. And I did platinum it, but I never did get to the centre of the universe, but there just wasn't enough there. It was just a slow trudge walking around, mining rocks and fuel for your ship and your laser tool and whatever else you were doing in it. It was just boring after a while. I did get into it to get the platinum. I was absorbed in it, but it was disappointing, especially when I looked back and saw what they were actually promising. And granted, they have updated this game over the years, but I only played the launch version of No Man's Sky, and it left a sour taste in my mouth, and I didn't want to go back and play it because I had moved on, and it had its chance to grab me, and it failed, and it lost me as a customer. So yeah, this was one of the bigger disappointments. Even though I wasn't totally into it at the start, when buying it and seeing the potential it could have had, and playing it at that point, it just felt really disappointing, to be honest. I mean, all this footage you've seen here doesn't really happen in the game that I played. The No Man's Sky I played was a lot more tame compared to this. I certainly didn't have any situations where I could shoot, and worst of all, I could never meet up with my mate who I brought it to play with and go and explore at that point, so that was a big disappointment. But if you're out there and you're playing it, look for some planets with notes for the names, because I left a secret message in one galaxy linking to my account to message me, so if you do find that, give us a shout. And so, the number one most disappointing PS4 game of this generation is The Last of Us Part 2. And it really does pain me to say that, and if you'd asked me at the start of the generation what my worst game would be, I would never in a million years have thought it would have been Last of Us 2, but my god, I just don't like this game. It's just disappointing on so many levels, and it was always facing an impossible task when the first game is my favourite game of all time, one that I consider an absolute masterpiece. Just how would you even top that, or even just live up to that? And unfortunately, Naughty Dog just didn't have the answers for me. And I'm sure there are people out there that do like it, but me, I just didn't think it was worthy. And for me, Last of Us 1 never needed a sequel. It was perfect as it was, leaving the ending open for your interpretation. You could decide the fates of those characters, and I wish they had just left it. If they really did need to make a sequel, I always said they should have set it in a different city, a different part of America, with a completely new cast, and just tell a story of those people's survival. And I really wish they would have done that, because what they did to Joel and Ellie in this game was just terrible. They just tore them apart, and it just lost what made that first game so great. The relationship between those two characters and how it developed over the course of the year in a game that they spent with each other. In the second game, they just sort of throw all that out the window, and no two characters' relationships are ever really developed. Ellie and her girlfriend's relationship is just, it's sort of just there. They just are together, but they only got together the day before, the night before the game starts, and their characters are sort of just, they're just a good couple, but you never really see them become a good couple. It's just sort of already there. It doesn't really work for me. And then they just sort of drop one of those characters halfway through the game, just completely sidelining them. And for the majority of the game, Ellie's just on her own, but she's not the same Ellie from the first game, that sort of wisecracking but smart Ellie. She's just this sort of angry and just dreadful and just depressing version of the character, and I get that's what they were going for with the whole revenge storyline, but it didn't work for me. And this game is just way too long for its own good, and the other playable character in the game I just hated, and I was just felt forced to play as her. Maybe that was their intention, but I never related to her, and I never really felt anything for her. She was the villain in my book, and trying to get me to sympathise with her after playing the game for like 12 hours and then making me play with her, repeating those 3 days for the next 12 hours just made it a slog. It was an absolute slog, this game, to get through. And Abby as a character was just a cunt. She was just a horrible, horrible person. And it wasn't because of her physical appearance. That didn't really bother me. It was a bit strange. You know, you don't normally see that, but like a woman with that built in a game, but fair play for them for doing that. I don't have a problem with a strong female character or anything like that. It was just, I didn't like the person. She was horrible to everyone she met. She was the worst. She was the biggest killer in that group, killing all of the other group, and the way she just switched allegiances straight away on for two basic strangers and killed all of her own people. You know, I just didn't get it. And then at the end of the game, this thing you've been working towards for the whole game, you don't get it, and it just, I didn't enjoy it, and it's not one that I ever really want to play again, and I can't say that about the first one. So that's why this one was the biggest disappointment, the biggest disappointing game on PS4 for me. Let me know in the comments below what your most disappointing game is. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.